Greetings, First Congregational United Church of Christ. I'm Eric Elnes, and I'm so glad to be here in the church. Actually, I'm not really. I'm right here. But it looks a lot better to be here, doesn't it? I certainly can't wait to be physically at the church, and my family and I are so excited to, in just a few short weeks, be with you and see you personally, or at least see you virtually, but in closer proximity. The stewardship team was gracious enough to invite me to offer a word or two about my own understanding of stewardship, and thank you for that. I appreciate having that opportunity. I don't see stewardship the way a lot of people do. A lot of churches, they give to a budget. They say our budget is so much money and we need to raise this much. But I think that in my path, personally, giving has nothing to do with what the church needs. It has everything to do with what I need. I have an intrinsic need to channel my gratitude for all of the blessings that I continually receive. I think about every morning I have a discipline of getting up and I think through for at least 5 or so minutes about the last 24 hours and the blessings I've received there. It's the gratitude journal thing that I talked about with the kids when I was there last. And it just reminds me of just how abundantly God provides for the world. And when I do that, I just can't help but give in a number of different ways, including with my finances, especially giving it with my finances and my time to making sure that I'm actually building some awareness of this generous God and the community that orients itself around this generous God. So I've always considered it to be actually a privilege to give to a faith community, not a burden or an obligation. And that's what I encourage you to do too. I would never give to a faith community out of guilt or a sense of duty or so forth, even though those are popular modes by which congregations typically communicate stewardship. But to me, it's about what I like to do is well, I think about a time when I was in high school, actually, that was really my first lesson in stewardship, but it actually wasn't about stewardship directly at all. It was a lesson I took in rock climbing. I was a senior in high school, and a person who worked for my parents in their business was an avid rock climber, and I'd always wanted to go rappelling. I'd just been kind of getting into rock climbing, and he learned of this interest and invited me to do some rappelling one day on a cliff near Snoqualmie Pass. He took me up and we walked to the top of this cliff, and the view from the top was just incredible, at Snoqualmie, near Snoqualmie Pass in Washington. But it was rather intimidating to look over this, what was about 100-foot cliff as well. It's like, I'm gonna go down that? But he harnessed me up, he tied off the rope, and then he instructed me as he kind of fed the line to lean out over the cliff, if this is the cliff and this is me, to lean out until I got perpendicular with the cliff that I could go down. Well, the first time I tried that, I just to be able to lean out 1 inch over that cliff just took so much trust in that rope and his command of it and its tie off on the tree. It was just brutally scary. And as I went out, every instinct in me wanted me to stop. I was, maybe 45 degrees out, and he said, "No, don't stop. It's more dangerous if you are at that degree because your feet can easily slip out from under you. You need to get to 45 degrees." And I thought, how am I ever going to get to 45 degrees? This is so terrifying. But I just kind of gritted my teeth and leaned out, and I finally got to that point. And once I got there, I could feel my footage, and I had enough trust in that rope. I knew it wasn't going to give way, but I had this setting on the rock that felt so secure. It was just like the difference between night and day. I couldn't believe it. I calmed down, and I realized that I could actually kind of jump a little bit and go around the rock and make my way down quite comfortably, and it was so fun. But I had to get from degree 45 or even 47 to 50 before that actually I passed through that kind of threshold in a sense, and became rather than terrifying, it became fun. Well, I think of when I think about my giving to a church, it works very much the same way. There's a threshold, and really with any kind of deeply spiritual thing, there's a threshold. It starts with some discomfort and sometimes even fear or terror. But the interesting thing is that every reaction is to close that gap and to go back to stasis or what had been to make you more comfortable. But actually, to the extent that you're actually committed to going in this direction, it's actually not so good to not commit all the way. And so that goes with a prayer life, for instance, even. I mean, prayer is actually quite uncomfortable and not very fulfilling up until you reach about 15 minutes. And then studies show, and personal experiences certainly showed, that's when you hit a sweet spot and it begins to get more and more interesting the longer you go. Studies show that the people with highest satisfaction levels in prayer and meditation are doing it for between 15 and 30 minutes is actually the height of that satisfaction. After that, it still rises, but more gradually. That's a spiritual threshold. Or you may think about when you are in relationship with someone and you're feeling like perhaps you want to commit your life to this other person, and it gets scary until you finally say, I want to do this. And then suddenly, it's like 10,000 pounds of bricks come off you, and you're light and airy, and then you go for it. Same thing with the giving. When people ask me what should they give, I always say, well, that's a conversation you have between yourself and God, really. And that's really where it's supposed to be. But if you want some advice based on personal experience and also our tradition has always advised giving as a percentage of your income. And there's a reason why that 10% figure of tithing has been so long-standing both in Judaism and in Christianity. It's because it seems that it's like going down, the rock climber thing. You reach a point where throughout masses of people, that seems to be that place where you've reached perpendicular and it starts to feel good. It once goes from being terrifying to actually feeling really good. However, I am not advocating that you tithe if you haven't done this. Tithing is a very serious discipline, and you don't want to do that unless you feel ready to do that and wanting to do that. You should never, ever give a tithe because you think you should, or because you think God wants you to, or the preacher wants you to, or whatever. It will always backfire. What I recommend for people who are just starting to think about giving as a percentage of their income is to actually make a chart out. What would 1% of your income? You use gross or net. If you're dealing with that detail, that's really you're doing the right thing anyway. So just make your own decisions about that between you and God. But just take 1%, 2%, 3%, 4%. Map out what 1 to 15% of your income would look like if you were to give that to the community of gratitude, in the community of faith. And then just envision, like, hey, what would 1% feel like? What would 2%? And you begin to ratchet that up, and what you'll notice is there's a point where you get increasingly nervous, and then there's a point, if you think this through and what this is doing for you, not just simply for the community, but actually putting your money where your mouth and your heart is, and committing some real resources to the expansion of God's welcoming realm around us and helping transform lives, that you reach a point where it's like going perpendicular. It may not be for you at that 10% point. Again, not everybody's ready for that. There's a sweet spot that really it has to do with where you're at in your own travels and with God and with life. But you reach a point where it goes from being scary to suddenly like, this feels good. That's the place I advise giving. And if you are interested in tithing, but you're still feeling like scared, maybe you have debts to pay, you have your credit card bills and so forth, and in this COVID crisis, a lot of people are really in financial distress. What I think is a really helpful thing to do is actually take that 10% figure and then figure out whatever percent you can give, where it makes you feel excited to the church. And to the extent that that's below 10%, actually use the rest of that to pay off your debts. I think that of all of the beings that would be against debt, it would be God. throughout the scriptures, God just doesn't like people to be encumbered with that. And so if you're giving 2% of your income and an extra 8% to paying down those credit cards, count that as a full tithe. As long as you feel like this is something that is blessed and feels good in conversation with God. So bottom line is there is no set figure you should give. That is really about your individual journey with God and figuring this out, through spiritual discernment, but making sure that it's not just simply paying whatever you can afford or whatever makes you comfortable. I mean, if I were to apply that to the rock climbing, the rappelling situation, I would have just been most comfortable standing at the top of that cliff and not going down at all. We don't really get anywhere that way by staying in our comfort zone. It's moving past our comfort zone into discomfort and then past discomfort into joy. That's the right way to give. And the stewardship theme couldn't be better this year. For such a time as this, we're all on quite an adventure in our world today. It's going to take a lot of adventurous souls who are able to meet all kinds of scary and terrifying situations and push through them to the point where their activity produces them joy. Stewardship is just one more piece of a basic orientation we have towards life, as it should be. Our money is no different from other forms of wealth. Other forms of wealth being things like generosity and gratitude and humility, mindfulness, love. All these are resources as well. Money is just one of them, but they all tend to work that same way. We push through discomfort into joy, and we know that's where we ought to be. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to hear a few words from me, and I have no doubt that please have no doubt that where I want to be very shortly is with you. I can't wait to be with you, and take care, and God bless.